make it really awkward for these folks over here. Good evening. How's everyone doing tonight? How's everybody doing tonight? All right. All right, on behalf of KPCC and LAist and our event partners, the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, thank you for joining us tonight. My name's John Cohn. I manage KPCC In Person, our live programming and events platform for KPCC and LAist. In addition to our broadcast and digital news service, we do a range of events, live broadcasts, performances and presentations, community conversations, and forums just like this one this evening. Tonight's event is the first installment of our SoCal Solutions series, in which we ask you, the community, to help determine the specific focus of the program by submitting your questions and suggestions. We then put it to a public vote, and for tonight's forum, the top vote getter was, "I'd like to know how and why the total cost of college got so high and what we can do to bring that cost down." So that's what we're going to do tonight. The next two SoCal Solutions events will focus on crime and policing and healthcare, respectively, so we invite you to share your thoughts and RSVP for those events as well. They'll take place right here on May 22nd with Frank Stoltz and June 19th with Michelle Faust-Ragavan. To learn more about those and all of our upcoming events, check out kpcc.org/inperson. And I should also note that our community-centered storytelling series, Unheard LA, is back for a third season and will be just down the street at the Aratani Theater on May 19th, if you want to check that out. Little housekeeping. As a news organization, we are audio recording and live video streaming and photographing tonight, so please feel free to use your devices, but please put them on silent mode. Photos are okay, but please no flash. Please no flash and no audio or video recording. We have that more than covered. We invite you to join us on social media using hashtag SoCal Solutions, one word. There will be a couple of opportunities for you to participate in this evening's program, and we just ask that you wait till a microphone comes to you. If I've missed anything or you have any questions about KPCC or KPCC in person, I'd welcome the chance to talk to you at our casual reception afterwards, which you are all invited to. But for now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming your host for the evening, KPCC education correspondent, Adolfo Guzman-Lopez.
How's everybody doing tonight? Thanks a lot for coming out to our event. In the green room, we were sharing all kinds of great commuting stories, so I hope everybody had a good commute here, whether it was by foot or by scooter or by car. As some of you may know, I've been a reporter at KPCC for quite a bit, and I've covered a lot of different stories, a lot of different beats. I'm currently the higher education reporter, but what's been great about this transition the last couple of years to higher education is that I have been able to use quite a few of the just the other, reporting that I've done over the years, whether it be City Hall, whether it be campaigns and elections, whether it be focusing on transportation and that sort of thing. Higher education really is a beat where a lot of these issues that are facing us in Southern California are coming together, and I've been having a great time really, sinking my teeth into some of these issues. There are so many stories to tell, is what I've been discovering. I could spend full time just on USC and UCLA with all the news that's been coming out there, but we've decided to cover higher education in a way that gets at the obstacles and the challenges that students face and how they're overcoming those obstacles, right? And what's happening that creates those obstacles. So that's what we've been doing. And that's why we're here tonight. We're going to be hearing from people in the know on many different levels. This is a KPCC program, and just like you hear on the radio with all the other programs that we have, we've got great guests tonight. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Michelle Siqueiros. Michelle is the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity that's based in LA, and it advocates for policy changes to open access to higher education. Thanks a lot for joining us, Michelle. Really appreciate your expertise. All right, so how did college costs get so high? How did we get here? I mean, I think the most telling data is that in a period in the 2000s, tuition at the public colleges doubled, basically, at the Cal States, UCs, and community colleges. So what was the ripple effect on both the students in college and those who were wanting to apply?
Well, I think first we have to start with the fact that California has been best in class since establishing our University of California, Cal State, and community college system, really valuing that it should be affordable. In the 1960 master plan, California has really led the nation in saying that there would be no tuition. And so how has it gotten expensive? Well, since the 60s, we have justified decreasing our state investment in our public colleges and universities and therefore shifting that cost to students. And what you find is that during every economic downturn, the cost burden continues to rise and be faced by students because our state leaders aren't feeling from all of us as taxpayers, I think, the sense of urgency that they need to do more to support our public colleges and universities and keep college affordable. And also at the same time, we have a growing demand. So we know that living in a 21st century economy, you need more than a high school diploma in order to be able to pay the rent, get a car, move around, all of the basics. And so there's a growing demand for educated workers amongst the workforce and our businesses. And all of that is happening at the same time, that we haven't expanded access to our public colleges and universities as much as we should.
The people I talk to in higher education, often like yourself, talk about this master plan. And, higher education, there used to be no tuition. It used to be free at one point. So is the idea among advocates like yourself to get back to that point, or is it to kind of shame the policymakers into saying you've strayed so far from the promise California made to have free public colleges and universities?
I think our focus at the Campaign for College Opportunity has been to make college affordable. And free tuition is not free college because students have to buy books, they have to pay for housing, they have to get to and from campus. And our focus has been really provide aid to students who need it and ensure that low and middle income families can go to college. I think most of us would attest that we have this core value in California that if you work hard and if you're smart, money should not be an obstacle for you to go to college and graduate from college. And that is what we want to ensure happens, and that our state leaders invest in such a way, and also that our colleges do a better job at serving students so that they can get in and through in a timely fashion.
I vividly remember covering Cal State trustees meetings in the 2008, 2009 when they're voting on tuition increases. And students came out and protested. As a matter of fact, I remember that there's a window to the right of where the main trustees sit. And I remember, these students protesting with, drums and like these huge puppets. And inside there were these decisions being made that were going to affect students dramatically. Right around that time, 2008, 2009, tell me a little bit about the work that you were doing, and did you realize the impact that those tuition increases were going to have on students' lives?
Well, we have seen record increases in tuition and fees. Fortunately, I think small silver lining is that we have significant investments in financial aid and Cal grants that are tied to tuition and fees for students. And so certainly some students get some cover from that. I think it's a tough situation for trustees and regents because the legislature allocates the budget. And so an institution does have to make a decision. Do we serve less students? Do we expand access? How do we do that and keep it affordable? And so I don't want to diminish or put all the blame on trustees or just on legislators who are obviously managing hard times. The recession hit all of us pretty deeply, right? But I think investing in higher education is one of the areas where the state is making an investment. You know, we have done research and analysis that points out that for every dollar California spends on higher education, it gets a $4.50 return. And so that's what we need to remind our leaders, because those investments pay off. Educated people in our state pay more taxes. Educated people in our state have access to health insurance, don't require social service expenditures. And so there's huge benefit. We can spend on higher education or we can spend on prisons. I suspect most of us would prefer to spend on education.
So since the recession and since the tuition increases were made, it seems like this, I started hearing this idea, or students say, oh, I'm gonna go to a 2-year college, I'm gonna go to community college, then I'm gonna transfer. And to me, and I've heard people call that a myth, and it seems like you just kept hearing that more and more from students. And talk to me a little bit about how, do you agree that it's a myth? And talk to me about how dangerous in a way, dangerous in the sense of to college students' careers, it's been that they get this idea that they're gonna go to community college for 2 years and transfer right away to a 4-year university.
Well, it's not a myth for 4% of students. So 4% of California community college students can transfer within 2 years.
And do.
And do.
Right.
And that varies. That's a much lower number if you're African American or Latinx. And so I think all of us would agree that it's an unacceptable rate of transfer. And when California designed the master plan, made a very explicit commitment to sending the majority of undergraduate students to a community college. So only the top 12% are eligible to go to a University of California, the top third to a Cal State University, and the top 100% can attend a community college. And we have an incredible community college system that serves over 2 million students. It trains our nurses, it prepares folks in all kinds of careers in public safety, firefighters, and it also is a vehicle for transfer. But our educational system needs to operate better and smoother, and we need to increase that 4% number significantly.
So the campaign released a report a couple of years ago that was very interesting. I covered it. Many other outlets covered it. And the idea behind the report was that transfer students pay more for college in the long run than if you go straight to a 4-year university. And that seemed counterintuitive. How could this be so? Talk to me a little bit about that report and what you found.
Well, what we find is that time to degree matters. So if you transfer in 2 years to a 4-year university and then you finish that 4-year bachelor's degree in another 2 years, that is absolutely really affordable. And that is an incredibly strong pathway to success. But if it takes you 4 years to transfer, or 6 years, or we just interviewed a student who finally earned her BA, it took her 10 years. And that is expensive, because every year that you're paying tuition and fees, every year that you're paying your cost of living, our study found that on average, students that go to community college and then transfer to the CSU, by the time they complete their CSU degree, they've spent $36,000 more than a student who just started at the CSU. $38,000 if you go to a University of California, more than a student who started at the University of California. So those are real dollar amounts, not to mention that you're not in the workforce with your bachelor's degree, earning more money. So time to degree matters. That is why our big focus has been on college completion, on making sure not just that students have a chance to go to college, but that once they're there, they actually succeed.
So the last couple of years that he was in office, Governor Brown used the carrot and the stick method to keep tuition basically flat. So he had these pots of money that he would only give to the UCs and the Cal States if they carried out certain reforms, improved or shortened time to degree and improved graduation rates and that sort of thing. And it's interesting, I think your organization, correct me if I'm wrong, but tuition was has been flat mostly for about 5 years, is that accurate to say? But your organization didn't say, okay, everything's fine now because tuition's flat.
No, because we know that there are a lot of eligible students that aren't able to attend a University of California because there's not a spot for them. There's a lot of eligible students that have done everything we told them to do that are being turned away from the Cal State system. We see that the University of California and the Cal State system keep raising the bar, declaring impaction, a word I can't stand, but what that means is that when you have too many eligible students, a campus can now raise the bar on that department. And you know what? Most of them will never go back to what it used to be to get there. So for those of us that are in this room and listening live, we had a much easier time getting in. I had a 3.5 GPA, and I got into the UC, the Cal State, could have gone, anywhere. Good luck today, right? If that's your GPA, and you don't have 10 AP courses to go with that. And so I think what's frustrating about what's happening and why the admission scandal is a whole other topic, but it's just really frustrating that we continue to move where our expectations are at a time when we need more people to be educated and trained, and it's unfair to this generation. So on the freeze, I think that students have spoken out loudly and have been excellent advocates and leaders, and that is why the governor and Governor Newsom also in his proposed budget has required that tuition remain frozen for the institutions, and I think that's good given I think the chart that you showed or you're going to show, right, that shows the exponential growth in tuition.
Yeah. So let's bring up a couple of other guests, and we're going to go to you in just a minute. So I'm sure this has been bringing back somewhat PTSD about paying for college, and if there's some parents in the audience, also how you've put together some of those payments, or if you have some kids, how you're going to put together some of those payments. But let me bring up Jeannie Martinez, Isabel Castillo, and Marvin Martinez. So why don't you go ahead and have a seat. Jeannie Martinez is the mother of 3 sons, one of them who's a college freshman back east. Isabel Castillo, in the middle seat, is a student at Cal State LA who's been keeping her higher education dreams alive for about a decade. Is that it? Yeah. And Marvin Martinez is the president of East LA College. So we're going to be hearing from them in just a second, but I do want to go ahead and ask you about your college experiences. Anybody want to share how expensive or how cheap it was when you went to college, how expensive it is right now? We've got a mic up here, so if you want to go ahead and raise your hand and just tell us your name and go ahead and tell us your experience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Viorato. I'm a product of the CSU. When I was in the CSU, I graduated in 2016 with about $60,000 in debt because I had to fund my education.
Where'd you go to school?
Cal State Fullerton.
Okay.
And now I'm currently a Master of Public Policy student at UCLA, and I was lucky enough to get a fellowship from Graduate Division. However, I am in my second year with no funding, so I'm fully funding myself. And as a professional master's student, it's interesting in the UC because they require us to pay an additional $8,000 just for the fact that we're pursuing a professional master's degree. So on top of the normal flat rate of about $16,000 that we have to pay per year, it's an additional $8,000, and that doesn't include the cost of living in Westwood. So just in this year alone, I had to borrow about over $19,000 in Graduate Plus loans and max out the $20,500 that it cost me to get unsubsidized loans.
Was there no other option?
There was no other option, yeah, because this is something that I really want to do and I really want to pursue, but I don't have family members that can support me financially. So it's really very much maxing out the amount that I can get in financial aid, working part-time, and doing a student leadership position that allows me to get an additional stipend as well.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Anybody else? Jeannie, one of the things when we talked earlier, you described yourself as middle class broke. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, we don't have any assets. We don't own our house. We rent, and you know, we're middle class, but we don't have access to, you know, we're not going to go into $60,000 debt to send our children to college. We can't do that. I mean, my husband and I would pay for that. As you know, in our elderly years, we wouldn't be able to. He wouldn't be able to retire.
Tell me a little bit about that. You know, what kind of work does your husband do, and how are you putting some of the money together?
He is a Catholic school teacher and administrator. And in terms of putting money together for the boys,
yeah. So you've got one son at what college back east?
He's at Babson College in Wellesley.
So how was it that? How are you paying for that?
Well, we've been fortunate that we qualify for the Pell Grant. So he is getting the Pell Grant, and he is getting a grant from Babson, and he is also qualified for a merit scholarship. So he has a diversity and leadership scholarship. And so we are responsible for transporting him to and from college. Although he also has a travel grant, but it doesn't cover everything.
How hard or how easy was it to put all that together, find the college and do this?
Well, finding the college, he found it through school, through his college counselor. He was introduced to Babson, and we were really lucky that was a very good fit for him. And he applied early and got in. And so we knew his financial aid package in mid-December when all of those decisions came out. But I still didn't know, you know, I know that the cost and the money that you get, the cost isn't fixed. And I knew that we would have to pay for health insurance for him because he can't take his Kaiser to Boston. And so that was an added expense. And then, you know, my husband and I really wanted to take him to college together. We didn't want to send him off by himself. So, you know, we put that on a credit card and said, you know, we'll pay that off later, but this is really important to us.
Any loans?
He qualified for loans, but no, we didn't take out any loans. His, thus far, apart from his health insurance, his expenses have been covered. We're waiting to hear about summer school. He wants to go to summer school, and I got a bill the other day for $11,000, but he had just submitted his financial aid application, and he has been told by his financial aid advisor that his scholarship should cover it, but not necessarily housing. And they mentioned that they need to take a look at his Pell Grant to see if anything's going to cover it from there. So we're waiting to hear what's going to happen with summer school.
How much did they help you that you don't own a home?
I think that helps that we don't own a home. I think so we're middle class broke, and I think that's one of the reasons why we qualify for as much aid as we do, and why one of the reasons why he received so much help from Babson.
So before we go to Isabel, tell us a little bit about your college career. You're now at Mount San Antonio College. What are you studying, and where are you going to transfer after that?
I'm currently studying psychology as my major and kinesiology as my minor, and my hope is to transfer to Cal State Fullerton. I will finish up my transfer credits this semester, and when I'm finished at Cal State, I would like to do a graduate program in sports psychology, but that will really depend on money. I have no idea whether or not I could find a fully funded program for a master's degree, and I don't like hearing that it'll cost an extra $8,000 on top of tuition, so that gives me pause, but that's what I want to do, and we'll do everything I can.
And you've got your second son has been accepted to college
Yes.
And got a similar package as your first son, is that right?
Similar, except it's all grants. So he is attending, or he will attend, Santa Clara University, and he received basically, tuition and a little bit more from Santa Clara in the form of a grant, and then he gets the Pell Grant, and then he qualifies for the Cal Grant, which I didn't realize Santa Clara will accept that, so that's very helpful. So he should have everything covered, and fortunately, he's going to school in California, so he can take his Kaiser insurance with him, so we won't have to pay for that. And we won't have to fly him 3,000 miles to get to school, so that's also really helpful.
Okay. So Isabel, walk me through a typical day during the week, a school day at Cal State LA. What time, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed?
So I wake up at 2:30 in the morning. This is because I have to go to work. So I start work at 4 a.m. I might be off at 11:30, but most likely I work a full shift up to 1 p.m.
What kind of work do you do?
I work in retail, so it's super convenient, and they're really lenient in terms of my schedule. But I still have to work those really early hours that are very draining by the time I get to school. So I rush home, I shower, I pre-pack a lunch the night before. I'm at school from 3 p.m. to up to 9 p.m. I go home, I still shower, I might read or study. I go to bed like around midnight, and I start my day over again, which is around 3 or 4 a.m. So it's just, every day is a little bit different, but I don't have a day off. I'm constantly working 7 days a week. If I'm not at school or at work, I'm volunteering. I'm also doing research with first-gen students with my research advisor. So I take on a lot, definitely.
Why do you work so many hours?
I have to work a lot of hours in order to just make a living. It's not even enough for me to pay tuition at times. I definitely get help from my sister in terms of sometimes I don't have enough money to pay rent. So she'll pay my rent, and then as soon as I have enough money, then I'll go ahead and do that. And it's been a really long process where there was a point where I was suffering food insecurity just because there was not enough money. Either I pay tuition or I eat. And I've put my education like in basically as a priority right now in my life because I feel like it's really important and it's something that I've invested in, and it's not something that I want to give up easily. So I've definitely had to give up a lot in order just to get where I'm at.
Tell me your major, your career goals, and you transferred to Cal State LA from a community college, so tell me a little bit about that.
So I was at ELAC for about, I want to say 7 years. I was on and off. I would try and scrape up money just to pay for maybe a class if I could afford that at the time. I transferred into Cal State LA about 2 years ago as a public health major. I'm 6 classes short away from graduating, so I'm really excited and happy about that.
You can do it.
It's been a long journey, and it's been hard at times. I've wanted to give up, but there's just this voice in my head that said I couldn't. Like, there was just no option.
And as difficult as things are right now, when you were in community college, it was harder, you will tell me. Why was it harder?
It was definitely harder because I'm a DACA recipient, and at the time when I started going to ELAC, there was nothing that could help me. There was no aid. It was just me just trying to navigate these new systems that nobody had ever spoke about to me in terms of family. I'm a first gen as well.
So as a DACA recipient, you can't get federal aid that many other college students can tap into.
There's not a lot of resources. So college life is already hard, and it's 10 times harder if you're a DACA recipient or if you're just starting your journey in higher education.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for sharing that. So Marvin Martinez, can you react to Isabel's story and how often do you run into students who are going through so much on your campus?
It's a common story, but what makes Isabel so special is that she has persevered. or we call it ganas, right, in Spanish. She perseveres. And because of her perseverance, she's been able to overcome so many obstacles. The first one being that, if you are going to be at a community college 6 to 7 years, the probability that you're going to transfer is very small. The odds are against you. So no doubt, Isabel was able to overcome that. But, just to get at the core of what's going on here, when you hear about Chini and Isabel, what's the common thread here? The common thread is they didn't have enough financial aid. They didn't have enough resources to pay for the cost of going to school. In fact, the state chancellor's office has stated that many times, even after students get the aid they need to receive, they're still around $6,700 short per semester. So again, if you multiply that times 2, that's $13,400 that they're short. To me, that's where a lot of the problems come from. You don't have enough money to pay for your textbooks. By the way,
How much do they cost on your campus?
Isabel in the green room was sharing with me that she was paying, a little bit over $500 per semester for
But
books.
isn't that on the low end for your students?
Oh, it is. Usually it's about $700. Usually students are paying anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 per year in textbooks. And other costs, of course, include transportation. So if they have a car, you have to pay for parking and gas and pay the car. And then if you obviously need money to live, and you got to pay for your apartment and for food and so forth. They just simply don't have enough resources.
One of the interesting things about the conversation you and I had earlier was that there's very little you as a president of ELAC can do directly to affect the Pell Grants or the Cal Grants, but your campus has stepped forward and taken action. Specifically, your foundation has done several things now. Can you tell me a bit about what your foundation is doing and about the employees at ELAC?
Sure. What I decided to do as a president about 2 years ago is to challenge our foundation. As you know, normally every college has a foundation. And usually they raise money for scholarships. And I asked our foundation, well, we need you more now, more than ever. We need you to raise big-time dollars to help our students, because they have this gap that is creating an incredible challenge for them. So we ran a campaign so that we can have all the employees give. So you have employees on the campus paying as little as $10 a month to as much as $100 per month out of their paycheck, every paycheck, 12 times a year.
And how many employees did you say have stepped forward to do this?
A good question. We have almost 700 employees now that step forward. So they are paying, and those are the dollars we're using to provide students with food vouchers, with housing vouchers. Another example, one of the things that we've done is we've partnered with many of our local restaurants, and we started this program called the 1,000 Meal Challenge. So a lot of our local restaurants are providing meals to students, because we're not open, our cafeteria is not open all day long, and eventually they have to go have dinner somewhere. So restaurants around the campus are able to provide students with food through the vouchers through the dollars that we provide them from the campus.
Jeannie, I want to go back to you and ask you, having heard the other stories and having heard Michelle and the previous discussion about rising tuition, how could the process be different? I mean, you've probably thought about this and putting together the money to pay for your education, your son's education. What changes would you make if you could make some changes?
Well, I think that we're really fortunate in that navigating the system was a little bit easier for us. Our sons go and have gone to a private high school. We got a lot of financial aid for that too, but they had access to a system, counselors. My oldest wouldn't have known about Babson, and knowing how to navigate the financial aid system, that we were really lucky that we had help there. And so I think, but also my older two sons attended public high school their freshman year. And so they have a lot of friends still in the public school, high school, and I know that they don't have access to that same type of information. and so they don't know how to advocate for themselves.
Something you talked about earlier was really interesting to me. This, I think you referred to it as matching the college, this idea of finding the right college.
A good fit.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit. It reminds me of a story I did with a researcher at USC, Zoe Corwin, who's taken this upon as part of her research to help the students ask as many questions as possible and find, the traits and qualities of a college and see both financial, campus culture, and that sort of thing that will then help the students once they're there. But tell me about your story. How did you find that right college for your son?
Well, for my oldest, he was able to go on a campus tour of East Coast schools, and so he went to Babson and he saw the campus there, and then he met with his regional admissions counselor and found that their culture and what they were looking for in students matched with his personality and his drive and his goals. And actually, prior to being accepted there, his top school was Georgetown. And after he got to know Babson better, he realized, I think this is really the place for me. This is now where I want to go.
And was that a cheaper choice, Babson?
I mean, relatively speaking, no. I think Georgetown is, I don't know, maybe $75,000.
But ultimately, I'm asking in the aid that they offered you?
Well, for sure, yes. Yeah. The fact that he was able to receive this diversity and leadership scholarship.
Georgetown wasn't offering the same.
No. And then for my middle son, again, like finding the right fit. He initially didn't want to go to school in California at all, and we took him to see the schools up north and to see Santa Clara because my husband's an alum from there, and he fell in love with it. And so we really encouraged them to choose a school that was a good fit. And so it didn't have to be the most prestigious or the most expensive, but at the same time, we said you want to apply to the at least one really prestigious school, because the more expensive, the more private and prestigious, the more likely they're going to have an endowment fund to give you money. And so when I made the spreadsheet of all of the colleges, the number that was most important to me was what percentage of the students that applied for aid that they deemed actually qualified for that aid. How much of that aid did they receive? So what percentage of their need did their students get covered? And I would rank the schools based on that number for them and say if it falls below 80%, there's no point, because you don't want to go into debt.
So you've got it all down for your third son too, who's I think a sophomore in high school, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Isabel, same question to you. What has this process made you think about in terms of the cost of college and what you would change about how this process works?
Oh, well, I'm definitely trying to advocate for some change in that. And like I said, I'm doing research right now with my research advisor, and we're looking into the cost of education and how that also is tied to your mental and health and overall well-being, because it's really affected me. And I feel like I'm not alone, and I'm sure there's so many out there like myself. So if I can share my story also and advocate for them, then I think that's really where we're going to make change.
How has studying mental well-being improved your mental well-being?
Oh, I've definitely been empowered. I am more empowered than I was a year ago. I was just talking to one of my mentors, and she even said, like, oh, you've changed a lot in this just couple of weeks. It's just empowering myself through education, and I think that's basically what we're talking about here. Like, in order for us to make a change, we need to empower our youth, and not just the youth, but non-traditional students like ourselves, because that's how we're really going to make change, by getting together and continuing this dialogue and putting action behind it.
Marvin, what changes would you make if you had a magic wand?
Changes on the campus. I think the first one is that we're trying to figure out a way to close this gap that I identified for you. So there's work that we could do on a campus in order to close that gap. And we also realize that we can't do it by ourselves. So we're working with the business community. I mentioned to the restaurants to help us figure out a way to close all these gaps. We're also working really closely with the legislature. You know, there's a bill right now that if it passes, is known as Senate Bill 291, which is sponsored by Senator Connie Leyva. And what this bill proposes to do is that it proposes to provide students with a more comprehensive financial aid package, where students now can utilize those funds to pay for their cost of textbooks, pay for housing, pay for the cost of having transportation from a car to anything else they need. And if a bill like that passes, it can really transform students and give them a chance. And you're not going to see as many students drop out of school. And that's my concern every day, is that how do I stop other Isabels at East LA College from not going to school any longer? And luckily, you know, Isabel is such a special student that no matter what obstacle she faced in her life, she was able to overcome that obstacle. Well, you know, the reality is there's not a lot of Isabels too. So we need to be able to help all the students that we can. So no doubt, you know, to me, the challenge, you know, is how do we close that gap? What can a college do? What can a foundation do? What can the business community do? What can the legislature do? So that we resolve this problem together.
So right now the economy is doing well. What's going to happen to your campus and your students when the economy goes sour?
Well, actually what happens is many students come back to school because there's just not as many jobs. So right now, because the economy is going well, there's a lot of jobs, a lot of work, many students prefer to go to work and they don't go to school as much.
Okay, let's give a thanks to Jeannie, Isabel, and Marvin. And I'd like to bring up to the stage Lande Ajose. We're very fortunate to have her. Lande is the Senior Policy Advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom. She's also the chair of the California Student Aid Commission, which is where that was when I talked to you, I met you and talked to you. That's the agency that oversees the $2 billion, a little bit more than $2 billion Cal Grant program. So, Lande, I remember seeing Gavin Newsom at a lot of these Cal State trustees meeting. He's a trustee. He was a trustee as a function of him being the lieutenant governor. And so I know he understands the workings of the three public higher education systems. What I'd like to hear is that back and forth that you've had with him about higher education. You know, how does it work? You know, do you present ideas or do you carry out the ideas that he has? What's that back and forth been like?
Well, I'm first feel enormously privileged to be able to work in the administration, and really it's a sharing of ideas. I mean, we're very lucky to have a governor who spent 8 years on the CSU trustees, who spent 8 years on the UC Regents, and who really understands and knows what is happening in our institutions, and more importantly, what is happening for students. And so, you know, we share ideas pretty evenly. I think that, you know, the budget that we have right now is a pretty good reflection of some of his initial priorities. We have money in there for enrollment growth. We have money in there for student success. But if you look at that budget, what you also find is there are resources there for mental health services for students. There are resources there for immigration services for students and legal services. There are resources there to address issues of food and housing insecurity, which frankly is shameful that we have students who cannot eat and don't have a place to live. And so those priorities are really a reflection of what he saw, what he heard, what he understands about the student experience. And I always like to say, you know, I take a lot of meetings with Californians who want to talk about higher education. The very first meeting that he joined me for was when our 3 student groups came to the governor's office. And he said, that's the meeting I want to go to. He wants to hear about what is happening for students, and he wants to make sure that they're at the center of all of our work.
So you're the chair of the Student Aid Commission. And I remember last year, the commission took a very strong position in identifying total costs and saying to the legislature and to policymakers that the thinking behind what it costs to go to college had to significantly change. It had to change from just thinking about tuition to thinking about total costs, which is rent, which is gasoline, which is food, which is books. Tell me a little bit about that effort at the commission last year, and if you think that this budget is a reflection of some of that work that you did last year.
You know, it's interesting because I think what is important to remember about higher education is that the costs that students, while tuition is high, tuition is nowhere near the largest part of a student's budget. It's really total cost of attendance. It is housing, it is food, it is transportation, it's healthcare. It is all of those same things that makes it expensive for us to live in California. It's doubly expensive for students to live. And what we find are students are working a number of hours, they're working full-time jobs in order to try and balance that. And most of it is because they need to balance their cost of living. Something like 58% of students at our four-year institutions attend for free. Something like 47% of California community college students attend for free in terms of their fees. So what is driving their budgets is not really the tuition cost, it is the total cost of attendance. And so that's what the Student Aid Commission is focused on.
I think that shift or that advocacy that you all did, I think has had the most profound impact on how we see community college students, because do you think there's still the perception that if you're a community college student, no, it's real cheap, you don't really pay all that much?
There is a perception that, you know, it must be easy for you. One, it's the perception that you live at home with your parents, which is not always true. And there's a perception that it's cheap and it must be easy for you to go, and it's not.
Tuition is about $1,300 per year.
Tuition's $13 to $15, depending on the individual fees that your campus charges. And you know, there's an organization called the Institute for College Access and Success, and they've done a really nice map that looks at the UCs across the state and the CSUs that are proximate to those and the community colleges that are proximate to those. And what you find is that it is actually oftentimes less expensive for a student to attend a UC than to attend a community college. And it's because of the total cost of attendance. It's because at our UCs and our CSUs, there are more resources. There's institutional grants that you can get, which you can't get if you're at a community college. And so it's more expensive in terms of what you pay out of pocket to actually go to a community college, even though the tuition fees are much less.
To what extent does the governor want to focus his attention on community college students and their budget and helping? There are 2 million community college students in California. That's way more than Cal State and UC's student population put together. Does the governor want to focus his efforts on those students, the community college students?
Certainly we want to focus on the community college students, and we want to focus on the other students too. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is make sure that our institutions are student-facing and student-serving, right? And so we want to make sure that we are investing. This year, as Michelle said, you know, in the budget, we said, we're going to give you some money, but actually, quite frankly, it had some strings attached. And the money was predicated on the fact that they weren't going to raise tuition. Because tuition and fees are, you know, costly. But we recognize that that's not going to do it by itself. We're really thinking about financial aid, what needs to happen in terms of financial aid. This year, we have some money set aside for working parents, because working parents have a particular sets of needs. So rather than getting $1,672 as your access grant to cover, you know, your non-tuition costs, we're trying to up that to $4,000 to $6,000 instead. So we're really trying to pay attention to those kinds of things. We're trying to recognize and appreciate that California students aren't all 18 years old, aren't all coming from mom and dad's house. Many of them are adults who are returning to college. And so we're trying to increase the number of competitive grants, and those are grants that are given to students who aren't automatically entitled to a grant because they just finished high school. And I would say the Student Aid Commission, you know, their entitlement grants, their competitive grants, there's Cal Grant A, B, and C. One of our priorities, quite frankly, is to streamline the whole thing, because it's very confusing, and I think the confusion around what kind of grant you might be allowed to get and entitled to actually maybe prevents students from even trying to enter the system.
And on that note, what's the most important message you think to, you know, those high school seniors, those 12th graders and their parents about the Cal Grants? Are a lot of people who qualify not applying for them?
Well, you know, you need to fill out the FAFSA in order to receive a Cal Grant or the DREAM Act application for DACA students or for our Dreamers. And so, you know, I don't know. I think that there are lots of challenges with the Cal Grant program. One challenge that we find is a lot of community college students are not applying for Cal Grants. Some are actively discouraged to apply for Cal
By who?
Grants. Sometimes by their financial aid officers, with the intention that you should save your Cal Grant for when you're in your four-year institution. But part of it is, you know, we have a very open relationship to time to degree. And so what we're trying to do is figure out and encourage our institutions to do what they can to help streamline education so that students can go through as quickly as they can so that they can use those dollars when they're there. No one wants to run out of money.
But is that accurate, that if they use all their Cal Grant money now, they won't have it for their
It
4
is
year?
true. Cal Grants are limited to 4 years. So if you use your 4 years of Cal Grants at the community college, then you won't get through, which is why which is why you see everyone trying to increase time to degree. It's why we have guided pathways at our community colleges. Let's try to help students move through as efficiently and as quickly as possible based on their interests, based on, you know, the design of the curriculum and how we put those things together so that they can also use their grants as efficiently as possible.
You also know a lot about how local economies work and the relationship with education. You know, 10 or 15 years ago, we could have definitely blamed rising tuition on the higher cost of college, but is the just skyrocketing rise in rents in California to blame now?
I think so. I think it is. And, you know, the administration has a priority on really trying to solve the cost crisis for Californians. And in solving the cost crisis for Californians, you actually solve the higher education crisis in many ways also. Because because the cost of living is such a significant portion of every student's budget, if we can get a handle on, you know, some of those other costs, like housing, which is the largest part usually of a student's budget, then it actually will speak to the affordability challenges that we have as a state.
Okay. I'd like to bring back onto the stage Michelle Siqueiros and Marvin Martinez to join the conversation. Michelle, to you first, can I get some reaction to anything that Lande said so far about, I know you're an advocacy group, so you are supportive of the governor, you know, putting more money into the budget. But tell me, I mean, is that really the solution? You know, finding more money from somewhere, from different parts of the budget?
Yes, that's part of the solution. Definitely, I think the governor's budget is reflective of a commitment to higher education based on his experience. We were able to sit down with then candidate for governor Gavin Newsom to hear his priorities for higher education, and we are advocates, so it's good to see when some of those priorities are reflected in the budget. We will also continue to push him to do more. So part of that is we feel there needs to be more money for enrollment funding. We're certainly very supportive of the investments around financial aid. We would like to see a California that actually articulates a goal. How many of our residents should have some higher education experience? We believe that at least 60% of California adults need to have some college. That's based on just workforce needs. And so we would like to see the governor and the legislature lead on that and be very intentional about setting a goal for our state and helping us meet that goal.
Are there any other legislative proposals besides the one that Marvin talked about that you're looking at, or anything in the works right now?
Yes, so we are also supportive of Connie Leva's bill, Senator Connie Leva's bill to expand financial aid to address some of the full college costs that Lande has discussed already. We also very supportive of the governor's proposal to establish a strong data system from pre-K to workforce. There's legislation to get us to do that. And not because we love data, I am sometimes a data nerd, I will admit, but because we can't answer pretty basic questions in California that most states can around how many students are graduating from high school, where do they go, do they complete, disaggregating that data by race and ethnicity. How can we pull folks that have some college but are maybe shy of that bachelor's degree back into the system? So we can't answer a lot of questions. We're also pushing and hopeful that there will be a statewide coordinating body for higher education. We are one of 2 states that don't have a coordinating body for higher education. So right now you have sort of system advocates and outside advocates like myself at the campaign. But really what we need is a state transparent body that can focus on what are the workforce needs that California must meet, and how do we ensure that our systems are working well together so that community colleges are talking to the Cal States, are talking to the UCs, and that there's a clear expectation that they should be playing together effectively instead of operating on their own agenda.
To any 3 of you, what changes do you think need to be made at the high school counselor level or even at the college counselor level in terms of the advice that those counselors are giving students about how to pay for college, how to, pick the right college or getting into debt?
And that's a really good question. So I think that, a lot of our counselors are not really familiar with financial aid.
When you say which ones are you
A
talking?
community college or even at the high school level. And that's because for the most part, they're academic counselors. They are there to help you develop an educational plan of what classes you need to take so you can graduate. They usually refer students to the financial aid office so they can find out more about the various type of aids available for them. So we do need to provide them with much more training. I mean, no doubt, ever since the new funding formula was adopted and implemented, it really changed financial aid on our campuses.
So this is basically community colleges getting more money from the state depending on, if they had high populations of foster students, low-income students. Am I leaving out a population?
No, those are all the students. So for example, you have a campus like UCLA College. So who are those populations that need that aid? Yeah. Young men of color. Many of these students are first-time generation. They're the first ones in their family to go to college. Obviously, low-income students. And these are the students that are looking for aid. These are the students that do not come generally into higher education. They're the ones who are underrepresented. So given that situation, we have to figure out a plan. We have to give them the information they need, the aid they need.
Wealthy people have figured out how to help their students, people with the means, and that's getting outside advisors to help their students.
Well, I like to say
kids.
that if a high school doesn't see its job as preparing its students for college, we shouldn't be surprised that they don't prepare students for college. So high schools that do see that as part of their job provide guidance, make sure that their students understand about financial aid and fill out FAFSA. And I think, again, why do we need a coordinating system and data in California? It's to connect the dots, because until K-12 sees it as part of its responsibility to graduate students that are prepared for college, that have real, true, equal access to the A through G courses. You can't even apply to a UC or a CSU in this state if you haven't completed A through G courses with a C or better. Well, when I went to high school as a first-generation student, I was lucky, as far as I knew, because I was placed in those courses. My mother wouldn't have known to advocate for those courses. She sent me to high school, made sure I went to high school, checked my report card, made sure I got good grades. But we need to have that expectation of our high school leaders. We need to demand that. It should be part of their funding formula. We have pushed on the local accountability plans that K-12 districts must put together. They should set goals around A through G completion. And then they should be looking at their data. Are they providing equal access to A through G courses to Black students, to Latinx students, to Asian American students? Are there disparities with regards to race or gender? We know that there are. And if they're not disaggregating and sharing that information, and they're not intentional about making sure that they are providing equal opportunity to all students, we should hold them accountable.
What do you think it says that the latest numbers from the Institute for College Access and Success say that California is the fifth lowest on average in terms of college student indebtedness? It's a little under $23,000. So that's about $5,000 lower than the national average of what college graduates are in debt on graduation day. What's your reaction to that? Is it good? It's good news, right?
It's certainly better news than most of the rest of the country. I think part of what we see in California is students have less debt in part because we have such a generous financial aid system. The Cal Grant gives away almost $2.5 billion a year in student financial aid, and that makes a big difference in terms of the kind of debt that students have to take on. Now, having said that, that $23,000 on average looks very different when you start to disaggregate that by issues of race, ethnicity, and gender. And so it's not $23,000 that is evenly distributed. It is $23,000 for some students, it's $16,000 for others, and it's $30,000 or $35,000 for others. And it is often our most vulnerable students, the students who are least likely to enter higher education, who end up with the greatest amounts of debt. And so we do need to look at debt as well.
And students at for-profit colleges get into much higher debt because those for-profit colleges, some of them which have been closed, have been found to have defrauded students, had been pushing a lot of these loans. So there are fewer for-profit colleges in California. These colleges, that's a good thing in terms of the level of indebtedness, right?
Well, and I think, certainly if you look at the bills that we see in the legislature right now, there is a concern about how we are holding some of those for-profits accountable. There are bills on gainful employment. There are bills really trying to understand what is happening in that particular sector. We have a higher education system, and we should have an ecosystem of opportunity, so there can be many, many types of institutions, but all institutions have to be held accountable because these are oftentimes they're being subsidized with public dollars, and they are serving the public. And so that's really, I think, where we are seeing a package of legislation right now that's in that the legislature is considering.
Lante, what do you think that a college like East LA College, that it's gotten so bad to the point where, restaurant vouchers have to be given out to students who are food insecure?
Well, as I said earlier, I think that the level of food and housing insecurity is really shameful for our nation, for our state. I actually am really impressed with the innovation and the creativity to find ways to fill the gap. But the truth is, when you go to most of our colleges and universities, there are food pantries at most of our colleges and universities, which does not exactly, again, square with our notion of what does it mean to be a college student. But our college students are impoverished, and the most enterprising colleges now and the most enterprising student leaders now are figuring out ways to knit together a whole set of basic needs. And we at the Student Aid Commission have been talking about maybe there's a way that we can notify students when they get their award letter to say, here are resources on campus, so that students don't have to be in crisis before they realize that they can knit together a set of resources to help them make their way through college.
And an important thing to know about some of these pantries or some of these services is that you don't really have to be, in the extreme to go to the food pantry to get one of these vouchers. I mean, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the food pantries, not only at my campus, but most of the community colleges in LA, they're filled with students. Which tells you the severity of the problems and challenges our students are facing. But I believe that the next chapter of community colleges, as it relates to all the issues we've been talking about today, is one where we do have to come together. And I do agree with Michelle in that we have to come together with the UCs and CSUs because our students eventually, that's where they want to go. That's where they want to transfer to. Right now, what I can tell you as a president of a college, the way that I communicate with my colleagues at the CSUs and UCs is I got to call them, and hopefully we can meet and come together, but that's not the way to resolve the major problems that are facing the state of California. There has to be a much more formal mechanism for us to be able to come together to talk about these issues and to look at great data. Because I agree right now, the issues of data integrity are a huge challenge for us right now. So we do need to find solutions to those issues.
So before we get some concluding comments from the people up here, I'd like to open it back up to you, if we can get some of the mics out in the aisles. And here's an opportunity for you to question, challenge, share your story. And so let's open it up. If you want to go ahead and raise your hand, tell us your name, and go ahead and
Hi, good evening. My name is Cecil Howell, and so first let me share my perspective as a student, your initial question. So I graduated from the University of Nebraska in 1999. I'm a first-generation American, and I came actually from Mexico. So I was a U.S. citizen, but I came from overseas, and I finished my college in 6 years, including 1 year of study abroad in Japan. And about half of it was self-funded, which is, I worked 4 or 5, 6 part-time jobs, just hustled, no spring breaks in Florida, Mexico, no summer vacations, just worked. And then, the rest of it was, grants and scholarships. And there was also kind of a hustle to kind of cobble together the financial aid, which is, I had to become an expert at the application process and finding the scholarships. So that's myself as a student. Graduated with a double major, a triple minor. And then fast forward to 2013, I graduated from Chapman University up the street with a MBA, and that's after spending some time abroad.
how did you pay for Chapman?
That was half of it was a scholarship, and that's a story all into
What's
itself.
the yearly tuition? It's not cheap at Chapman, right?
No, it's not
What is
cheap.
it?
I actually don't know. I got a pretty generous scholarship based upon my situation at the time, and my father has a pretty big name at the school. He kind of talked to the chancellor and had one of those connections, and they brought me from overseas. So it was a very special situation. But in any case, and hearing what you're talking about, it's quite shocking. It's very disheartening to hear that students are taking so long, and it's part of what I'm doing now in terms of my professional work. But I think one thing that I'm not hearing is that a lot of the students, many of the students, if not most of the students that are coming into the system, are a lot less prepared to be in that environment on their own. When I say prepared, I mean academically prepared, emotionally prepared, mentally prepared for the challenges of living on your own as a college student.
That's a good point. Thank you. Can any of you comment about, financial education for students coming in to college?
Yes, I can comment on that. So you're correct in that a lot of students come to the campus not really understanding how to balance their checkbook or how to pay for bills or not to accept those credit cards that these various proprietary individuals are trying to give to them.
And when you say balance your checkbook, what do you mean by that? Is it just the basics of not spending more that you're earning, or is it more complicated than that?
It's, we have a term we call it financial literacy. So meaning that they're just not familiar of what it means to be able to understand finances and how to address them and how to deal with them. We do give, education and workshops and so forth to students on the campus. But again, you're talking about a campus like East LA College that has 30,000 plus students per semester, so we don't reach everyone. But the gentleman here is correct. It's a big topic, and so we have to do anything that we can to educate them.
I guess the one comment I would make about financial literacy is how you think about financial literacy really depends on your position, right? And I think students who have less money make rational choices given where they come from, right? So maybe they're taking their financial aid money and they're sending it home, or they're giving it to their parents, or they're helping to pay their parents' rent, and then they're living in their cars. So yes, there's some financial literacy, but it's also the case that students are making rational choices that are really rooted in their own circumstances. And so that's why, some of the strategies, some of the things we need to deal with in terms of higher education are very much about higher education. Some of the things are exogenous to higher education and are really about what does it mean to live in the state of California.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's get another comment.
Yeah, hi, I'm Aiden. I went to Humboldt State University, which is a Cal State way up north, and a lot in my experience at the school, there it seemed as if Cal State's and maybe the California university system in general made a commitment to accept a lot more students, and so Humboldt State University had a very seemingly sudden increase in students, and my major personally became impacted when I was in it. Luckily, it didn't affect me. But a lot of my friends and other students became homeless because of the sudden increase in rent prices, because the small town that the school was located in didn't have the housing infrastructure to support the sudden increase in students without raising rents substantially. And to me, that was, it wasn't so long ago, so it could have been a factor of rising rent prices in California in general, but to me, it seemed like there was a lot more students coming in, and it seemed that was because California, it made a decision to accept more students. So I guess I have two questions. One is, do you see any drawbacks in such a large system and diverse system of schools, not just in its student body, but in the schools themselves and the locations that they're in, and the difference between the small town that my school was in and UCLA, which has surrounded by apartment buildings, and two, is there a way to prevent a lack of understanding of housing and infrastructures in the schools themselves from affecting students? Is there something that the Cal State system can do about just raising the amount of affordable housing to students?
On the campus itself is what you're
On the
asking.
campus, yeah, in order to compete with off-campus housing, which is generally cheaper than on campus housing.
Anybody want to take that on?
Well, your experience is not uncommon. The norm at a UC campus, my son is a freshman and he's in a triple. And in some places I hear there's actually quads. So the days of 2 students in a dorm are real, far, far away. I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you speak to housing and on-campus housing as really being a necessary option. There is conversation right now about deferred maintenance bonds that would support the UC and the CSU, and we are in conversation around what that bond might look like, but you may be able to vote in 2020 to invest in essentially building and supporting the kinds of facilities we deserve. But again, it gets to investments necessary by the state, and housing is one of the most critical. You heard Isabel share, part of why she couldn't eat was because she was worried about paying the rent, and her tuition and fees and school costs came first. So what you're hearing is first school, second housing, and then maybe fourth or fifth, I get something to eat.
I guess the only other thing I would add to that, I was in a conversation about this issue 2 days ago with the Lieutenant Governor, and she's really interested in this issue of housing. The construction costs for housing are pretty astronomical. And I think she said, she went to UC Merced and also went to UC Berkeley, and she said at UC Berkeley, to build a dorm, for the door to that dorm room, it's about $275,000 to build per unit. $275,000. At Merced, it's a little over, I think she said it was a little over $300,000, but it's not for a unit, it's for a much more kind of expansive opportunity. So there are a lot of things that we need to unpack. We need to look at the kinds of public-private partnerships that exist, because it's not clear who's making money where. I think we need to look at where we do have, there are lots of residence halls across the state in our higher education systems that actually were built a long time ago, and yet they're being charged, students are being charged market rate for those. Those are not market rate residences. So there's a lot of different, I think, factors that need to be explored as we think about how to make housing much more affordable for students.
Yeah, so there is community colleges now who are looking at housing. And again, keep in mind, it has not been part of one of the services that we have offered traditionally at a community college.
Including yours?
Including ours. We don't have housing for students. But you are having now colleges. You know, actually, I visited one in Orange Coast. It's called in Orange Coast Community College. They're building a 820-bed facility, massive structure, about 4 levels. It is a public-private partnership that they're using in order to fund that. Santa Rosa Community College up north just announced today a new housing development, $42 million development, enough to accommodate 360 students. Sierra College is another one that's looking at housing. Compton College is looking also at housing. So everyone's beginning to see that as an answer to student homelessness.
Do you have room at ELEC for dorms?
I can't say because my boss is sitting in the audience and I can't really speak up about that, but yes, yeah.
Great. All right. Let's get another comment. Yep.
Thank you for the discussion. I don't even want to say how long I've been in City College, and I took a few years off. That's the math that basically held me back. And I wish they had told me, or I had the sense enough to know, and the education to know. I had to learn it before I took the class because I couldn't keep up enough with the algebra. I couldn't learn it quickly enough before it moved ahead. And the other, that's my challenge with college. And I haven't transferred. I don't know what I want to do, and I feel like so much of the discussion that I hear between podcasts, some on NPR affiliates or other programs, that the STEM fields seem to be the way to make money, like return on investment. And I just don't have the aptitude quickly enough to excel in those areas, and I don't want to be a nurse. So I'm kind of like, I'm blessed to have a job in admin. I'm just really lucky, and I know that. I don't know what other options there are, and I guess I just feel like the school, when I was in City College, they didn't really tell me, other than, oh, you need this class. Oh, shoot, I could have done that on my own. I found the guidance counselors useless. So I guess I just wonder, like, the payoff, like, if I get a general, some humanities degree, I don't know if it's going to pay off, and that's my concern. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to respond to 2 things that you shared. First is the payoff. It absolutely does pay off. The big recession that California faced and the recovery that we have been on has only paid off for people with a college education. Only folks with a higher education have reaped the benefit of it. So whether it's a humanities degree, a social science degree, it will absolutely pay off. You are likely over your lifetime to make more than $1 million than a high school graduate in this state. And it is the one constant thing that's always true. The second piece is you mentioned math, and that is something that we actually have fought very hard to change in California at the Campaign for College Opportunity. So first, it's very clear that especially at community colleges, students had to go in when they registered for class and be assessed. And it's kind of, you're told, oh, just go next door and take that math test, or go next door and take that English test without any preparation, any guidance, any ability to study. So I don't know about you, but if I was sent next door to take a math test without any preparation, I'm pretty sure I would fail it too. And I have a master's degree. Lande has a PhD, so she might pass it. That's unacceptable. We're overplacing students that probably just needed to be brushed up on their math, and that could take the college level course. And in fact, the research proves that if you put a student that got very decent grades in high school directly into a college level math or English class, they are very much likely to pass it. And so we advocated for more funding to fix remedial education classes because when only 5% of students that get placed in remedial ed classes go on to transfer or earn a degree, that means that your remedial ed classes are ineffective. And last year, we passed a bill that says the community colleges have to use high school grades in order to place students because of this overplacement problem. And that's a big issue with time to degree. I heard you say that's part of? Yeah, but I heard you say that's also part of what took you so long. So really just making sure that students have better access to that. And also that we acknowledge, like, what are the courses that students really need to have in order to complete? And sometimes colleges can be very rigid about you have to take algebra versus, well, could we take statistics? You know, especially if we're not a math and STEM major. So again, oftentimes students feel like it's their fault, and we make them feel like it's their fault, versus institutions owning what they can do to really support students to get through and earn that degree.
Marvin, what changes have been made at ELAC to address what is happening at many community colleges, which is that students don't get clear and good advice about what it's going to take to earn that AA, or what it's going to take to transfer?
So a couple things, just to expand on what Michelle was talking about. So we've had a number of initiatives and policies going back to 2012 with the what we call the Triple SP program, the Student Services program. It was a bill passed in 2012. And since that time, we've had legislation that has asked the colleges to do two things. One is ask the colleges to help students graduate much faster than ever before. Because for the most part, most campuses, it takes students 4 to 6 years to graduate. So it's asked them to help students graduate faster. Secondly, it's asked students and asked community colleges to figure out a way so that they don't have to take all these exams, as Michelle was mentioning, in order to, again, to expedite the process so they can graduate. We also have another program that Londe referred to, which is what's called Guided Pathways. What that program is all about is to provide clarity to students as to how they need to select a major or an area of study so they can choose it quickly, they could go and take the classes they need to take quickly and graduate faster. Just to give you an example, even as of today, at East LA College, we have over 200 majors. So imagine your first day in classes, you're 18 years old, you come to the campus and a counselor shows you, pick out a major. You're not gonna know what to pick. You're not gonna know what to select, and many times what would happen in the past, students would select the wrong area. They really didn't know what they wanted to major in. So we have to resolve major issues like that. We talked about nursing. When I ask students, why do you want to major in nursing? Well, because I want to help people. And I go, but do you realize that you have to take anatomy, physiology, and chemistry? And like, really? I did not know that. So I think that, students, we have to help students and clarify and make it easy for them so they understand why they are there.
Yeah. Let's get a few more comments in. Yep.
Hello, I'm Michelle Virato. So at UCLA, I've been able to learn a lot from an organization on campus called the Mothers of Color in Academia. And for the past 5 years, they've done a lot of advocacy work in trying to expand access to lactation spaces and talk about the childcare issue in the UC. Luckily, thanks to our participation with the UC Student Association, we've finally been able to work with the UC Office of the President to establish the MOCA UC Student Parent Work Group, because the amount of research on student parents is very minimal and kind of non-existent. Just this past January, Young Invincibles was able to publish a report on the experiences of student parents more broadly, and they identified the fact that about only 18% of four-year universities in California are accessible or affordable to student parents. So I'm really glad to hear that the governor is prioritizing student parents and trying to expand access, and that there is an interest in deferred maintenance, because a lot of the pushback that we've gotten for lactation spaces is the fact that the UC currently can't fund improvements that they currently need to focus on. So what my question is to you is, what are you all doing to prioritize the needs of student parents, although they may be smaller than other demographics in UC, CSUs, or community colleges, what else can we do as student advocates to make sure that we're highlighting the issues and concerns that they're experiencing?
Lande, is that on the governor's radar?
It is on the governor's radar, which is why we do have those resources that are set aside for student parents to increase their financial aid for their living expenses. I think the other thing to know about that particular proposal is that it is attached to and a priority for the governor because of his focus on early childhood education. And so increasingly what we're trying to do in the administration is we're trying to bust through the silos that we often see happening all across the state. There's a senior policy advisor in the governor's office that's focused on cradle to career issues so that we are looking comprehensively and systemically at what is happening to students and families all across the way. And that's why we have monies that are set aside for parents so that if you are a parent, there will be a whole series of supports for your kids, but we want to make sure that we're supporting the parents as well. Those kinds of two-generational strategies are becoming increasingly, are proliferating quite a bit across the nation, and there are a lot of states that are taking that up, and so we're looking at what it is that we can do so that as we think about our early childhood initiatives, we're also linking them to what is happening with their parents.
Yeah, and here's a plug for the higher education beat. LA Valley College has a parent resource center. We reported on it, and it's the only one of its kind in the entire California community college system, and it has a whole range of services that they provide for the parents at LA Valley College. Simple stuff like diapers, like books, to more essential stuff like daycare and that sort of thing, and mentorship. So that's a very innovative service just in our backyard. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, good evening. Uduak Jointuk from Long Beach. Thank you so much for the panel today. I successfully navigated the community college system as a low-income immigrant student. My dad's from West Africa, and it took me 9 years to finish. And near the end, I had no internet, no lights, no auto insurance, but I persisted and finished. And now I'm on the community college board in Long Beach, and we're dealing with, we estimate 6 to 10% of our students are homeless. We're super majority students of color, 80% students of color, 70% qualify for, Pell Grant or waivers. And we have the persistent problem that our minority white students do 2 to 3 times better than our students of color. And we actually have a task force we're working on. What are the best practices and the solutions to try to address the achievement gap? Because of throwing more money at it, addressing the homeless piece is a piece of it, but what solutions actually in Southern California are working to help move the needle? Because that's the majority of California, that's the future of California, that's the majority of K-12, and if we can't figure it out, we have this huge economic deficit of 1 million jobs that we need to fill by 2020 with bachelor's degrees. So if, from the panel, what solutions have you found locally that address the achievement gap?
First I would say I don't like talking about the achievement gap. I talk about the opportunity gap, because we are talking about what access to good education, good resources, good support services students have or do not have, versus putting all the onus on students. I also like to talk about whether campuses are student ready instead of whether students are college ready, because I think it really is about shifting our frame about who we serve and why we exist. This isn't about, this response or solution won't be directly about college affordability, but I do think if we care about the students that we're serving, if we care about closing the equity gaps that persist, then we need to have leaders on our campuses that reflect the student experience. So last year we released a report that highlighted the lack of diversity amongst college presidents, college faculty, boards of trustees, academic senates. And that's a problem in a state where 69% of California undergraduate students are students of color. And yet it's almost the reverse in terms of representation on campus. You want students to succeed, you will create an environment where they feel they belong, where they feel respected, where they feel valued, where they feel capable and where they can see themselves succeeding because they see success in front of them. And so as a Board of Trustee member, I would urge you to make sure that you're disaggregating data, that you implement hiring practices that ensure that people of color are not discriminated against. Sometimes folks say, well, we can't hire based on race because of Prop 209. One time a college trustee told me they did over 24 hires at her campus. Her campus is about 90% Latinx, and all of those hires were white. And when she raised the issue at the Board of Trustees, the response was, well, we can't talk about that because, you know, we can't just target hires based on race. And my response to her was like, are you sure they're not discriminating against people of color when you have that kind of outcome? And why isn't that question possible to be raised? Are you conducting outreach in a way that ensures that people of color are being reached to apply for those jobs? So, you know, it cuts both ways, and I think it's important to make sure that we're asking the very tough questions. And if we feel uncomfortable, that's okay. We have to do things differently and better, and some of those should make us feel uncomfortable. If we're an educator, we have the privilege of working with students, and we should do that correctly.
Great. All right. Do we have one more? Okay.
Hi, it's a great panel. Speaking of SB 291, I took a note, so I would assume everybody in the room will advocate for that when it's in whatever way you can on social. But I would ask you guys about advocacy on other kinds of legislation. In 2020, there's the Schools and Community for Split Roll policy that's, I think, going to be on the ballot. So actually everybody in this room is going to be able to weigh in on that. What can you, with the, I'm not going to call it a bully pulpit, but in your positions, do within your platform that you do have to advocate for that policy if you support it? If not, I'd like to know why.
Let's use that as final comments. If you can make a brief answer to that, and then we'll finish up.
Well, I can't actually comment on legislation because that's the governor's job to comment on legislation, particularly things that are going to be entertained. But I do think, you know, earlier in the conversation, you know, Michelle made reference to the master plan and the way in which the master plan made some promises to Californians for students. And one of the promises was around a free education. And one of the challenges with the free education was that while the master plan made that promise, it made no such suggestion about where the money would come from. Right? And so basically it was an unfunded mandate, right? And guess what? We have many, many more students in college today, and we don't have a way to support and fund them. So we are going to need to think about what's the sustainable funding source and the demands on the state of California. California is much bigger than it was. We have a very volatile revenue base in terms of taxes every year. And so we're trying to, you know, Jerry Brown used to always say, you know, we need to be progressive yet not profligate in how we think about our resources. And, you know, now that we are in the space of having to govern, we're really thinking hard about how can we make deep investments in the things that we care about and at the same time make sure that we are protecting and stewarding California's financial future for the long term.
Lande, it occurs to me that the census in 2020 is going to be very important. We've been talking about that a lot at KPCC. Real briefly, is that the case?
Absolutely. The census is going to be critical, and we're already gearing up in our offices around the census, but the census count is going to be essential to make sure that we get our fair share.
Yeah. Michelle, go ahead.
So we certainly support greater investments in higher education. We are looking at the bond proposals as they're being developed around split roll, around deferred maintenance for additional higher education resources. We certainly at the Campaign for College Opportunity previously supported Prop 30 so that we would ensure more investment in higher education in general. And then we also support ensuring that students leverage federal financial aid by completing FAFSA. We are also advocating at the federal level for additional Pell Grant growth so that students have greater access to Pell dollars and simplification of FAFSA in general so that it's easier to fill out that form and ensure that our students, our state, pulls down the money it deserves from the taxpayer base that we provide the nation. So I think there's definitely the state budget, There's future bond proposals that we can't take a position on until we see what is in there. And then I would just add also holding institutions accountable, which I think you heard me comment throughout. We are not just about more money for higher education without being very clear that higher education itself also needs to do a better job at serving our students, reflecting our students, and ensuring that they get to graduation.
Marvin, briefly.
It's a really good question. I think for the first time, I'm really beginning to see that college presidents, board of trustee members are becoming much more of advocates than ever before. And why are you seeing that? It's because we have to. We can't just stay in our ivory towers and not come out to Sacramento and talk about what we believe in. So I think it's a great thing. And I'm seeing that much more often. And I think when we go to Sacramento, I know legislators want to hear what we have to say. They want to hear what a trustee has to say. So I think we need to really take advantage of that. And just one last reason why this is also so significant. There is so much at stake today, more than ever. The involvement that the legislature has with community colleges has just grown tremendously. And I think that we have to be there to provide guidance and to provide suggestions and to provide advice. And so that good legislation can be developed that really helps us. And so I think that you're going to see more and more us becoming advocates.
So thank you to Marvin Martinez, to Landea Jose, Michelle Siqueiros, Jeannie Martinez, and Isabel Castillo, and our partner tonight, the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy. Thanks to all the KPCC staff who made this event happen, and thanks to all of you who joined us and everybody watching online. I'd like to encourage you tonight to join us in the lobby for a reception. Give some of the panelists some love, and thanks a lot for coming out, and see you on the radio or online.